In the final minutes before midnight on June 5, 1944, a military transport aircraft rattled and groaned as it pushed through turbulent air above the black water of the English Channel, its aluminum skin shuddering with every vibration of the engines. Inside the cargo bay, packed tight with men and gear, a paratrooper from an airborne regiment bent down and tugged once more at the leather straps wrapped around his combat boot. Secured along his calf was a small, unremarkable blade, light enough to forget, plain enough to be overlooked. It carried no ornament, no dramatic flourish, just a narrow length of American carbon steel shaped with purpose. That knife, produced in less than a day and costing the army little more than pocket change, would soon mean the difference between life and death, not once but twice. First, it would slice him free when a violent landing left him tangled in the branches of a tree, hanging helpless in enemy territory. Later, in the shadowed interior of a French farm building near Saint-Mère-Église, when an opposing soldier burst through a doorway at arm's length and there was no time to raise a rifle, that same blade would be drawn in a single instinctive motion and driven upward. The encounter would end silently. The steel would do exactly what it was made to do. What makes that moment remarkable is that the knife itself was never meant to be special. It was born not from ambition or innovation, but from necessity. It existed because something else had failed. It was a stopgap, a stripped-down solution rushed into existence by wartime pressure, built by factories that had never forged a fighting knife before and would never be celebrated for it afterward. Yet by the late summer of 1944, more than 2.5 million of these blades had been stamped, sharpened, and issued more than any other combat knife ever carried by American forces. Airborne soldiers tied them to their boots. Rangers wedged them into their web gear. Tank crews kept them close at hand. Even Britain's Special Air Service, legendary for its own brutal close combat weaponry, quietly chose this American knife over their iconic Fairbairn-Sykes dagger. Not because it was elegant, but because it was tougher, simpler, and more dependable when everything else went wrong. This is the story of the weapon no one asked for, yet nearly everyone depended on. A blade so efficient it erased its predecessors. A tool cheaper than a decent meal that endured far beyond the war that created it. The path to that blade began abruptly on December 8, 1941, in Washington, D.C., inside the offices of the War Department's Ordnance Division. The United States had been at war for exactly 24 hours. Phones rang constantly as requests poured in from every corner of the military. Rifles, cartridges, helmets, boots, bayonets. Everything was suddenly needed in overwhelming quantities. Amid the chaos, an ordnance officer descended into a storage room lined with metal cabinets coated in dust. Inside one of them were aging reports from the previous global conflict, inventory sheets yellowed with time. Buried in those pages was a solution, or at least something resembling one. Thousands of World War I-era trench knives still sitting in depots across the country, wrapped in oiled paper, untouched since 1918. The officer didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone and gave the order. Issue them immediately. Airborne units first. Rangers next. No one argued. The nation needed close combat weapons, and there simply weren't enough modern ones available. At that moment, the now famous Ka-Bar was not yet rolling off production lines. The sleek British daggers were foreign designs. What America had was the Mark-I trench knife, and so that was what went out. Throughout 1942 and into early 1943, crates of these relics were opened at training bases across the country. Young paratroopers at Fort Benning lifted out heavy knives their fathers might have carried in the mud of France. The design was intimidating. A double-edged blade paired with a cast bronze handle shaped like brass knuckles, finger holes lined with spikes, and a steel pommel. intended to crush skulls if the blade failed. It looked fearsome, almost medieval. On paper, it promised dominance in close quarters. In the hand, it told a different story. Soldiers quickly discovered its limitations. The bronze handle felt slick and cold, especially when wet. The finger holes never quite fit properly, and the brass knuckle guard locked the user into a single grip. Reverse holds were nearly impossible. Balance was awkward. At Fort Bragg in the summer of 1942, a ranger officer put the knife through its paces against training targets. Thrusts worked well enough, but slashes felt clumsy. Punching with the knuckle guard lacked control as the smooth metal shifted in his grasp. Similar reports arrived from every training center. The knife looked terrifying, but it was impractical. Worse still, it was expensive. Each handle consumed valuable bronze, material desperately needed elsewhere for shell casings and aircraft components. Manufacturing required time-consuming casting and machining. Producing enough of them for a global war would drain resources the Army couldn't afford to waste. By January 1943, the War Production Board faced a hard truth. Millions of fighting knives were required, and the current solution was too slow, too costly, and too inefficient. An alternative was proposed. Abandon complexity entirely. Replace bronze with stacked leather. Replace elaborate guards with simple steel. Focus on speed, durability, and ease of use. The numbers spoke for themselves. Production time would drop from hours to minutes. Costs would plummet. Strategic materials would be conserved. The only remaining question was whether such a simple knife would actually work. The answer would come quickly. In March of that year, the Army approved a new design. It was designated simply the M3. Its appearance was almost offensively plain. A narrow spear point blade just under 7 inches long, finished to resist corrosion. A leather handle built from stacked washers turned smooth on a lathe, warm and grippy in the hand. A small steel crossguard bent slightly for thumb placement. No ornamentation. No excess weight. 9 different companies were tasked with producing it, many with no prior experience making knives at all. Yet within weeks, tens of thousands were complete. By early summer, there were enough to equip every airborne unit preparing for the invasion of Europe. When the first crates arrived at Fort Benning, skepticism was immediate. Compared to the old Mark I, the new knife felt almost insubstantial. But as instructors tested it, opinions shifted rapidly. The blade penetrated deeply. The edges sliced cleanly. The handle accommodated every grip imaginable. After repeated strikes, the steel held. Evaluations were blunt and unanimous. The new knife outperformed the old in every category that mattered. Factories across the country shifted into non-stop production. Leather washers were stacked. Blades were ground and sharpened. Inspections were quick, efficient. By mid-1943, output reached hundreds of thousands per month. The M3 became ubiquitous. Yet its true trial would not come in training yards or factories. It would come in the darkness. That test arrived in Sicily during Operation Husky. Paratroopers dropped into chaos. High winds, scattered landings, enemy patrols everywhere. Men found themselves alone, far from objectives, carrying only what was strapped to their bodies. In those moments, the M3 proved its worth. It cut parachute lines. It opened paths through canvas and rope. It served silently when firearms were impractical. Its lightweight meant it was always there, unnoticed until needed. Story after story echoed the same theme. When everything else was lost or unusable, the knife remained. Those stories multiplied in Italy, then in France. By the time the airborne armada crossed the Channel toward Normandy, the M3 was no longer a compromise. It was trusted. When planes shook under flak and soldiers jumped into darkness, that simple blade went with them. When landings went wrong and voices whispered nearby in the dark, it freed men from trees and ended threats without a sound. It was never glamorous. It was never celebrated. But it worked, and sometimes that is all that matters. Inside a dimly lit barn near St. Miraglis, 3 pathfinders work quickly and quietly, hands moving by instinct as they assemble a Eureka beacon meant to guide thousands of men out of the darkness. The air smells of hay, dust, and fear. Then the barn doors creak open. A shape fills the doorway, backlit by moonlight. The outline is unmistakable, enemy uniform, rifle held ready. There is no warning, no shouted command, no time to think. The distance is too short, the moment too sudden. The paratrooper knows instantly his rifle is useless here. He lets the Garand fall, steps forward without hesitation, and in one smooth motion reaches down to his boot. Steel flashes briefly, then disappears. The knife performs exactly as it was meant to. By dawn, more than 13,000 airborne troops are scattered across the fields, hedgerows, villages, and forests of Normandy, many alone, many cut off, all operating in chaos. Nearly every one of them carries the same simple blade, some tied to their boots, others hanging from pistol belts, others shoved into web gear wherever it fits. The knife becomes more than equipment. It becomes insurance. When the rifle misfires, when magazines are empty, when grenades are gone, it remains. 7 ounces of hardened steel, quiet, dependable, merciless when needed. Across Europe and the Pacific, the blade earns its reputation not through ceremony, but through constant use. Rangers rely on it during brutal fighting in Italy. Airborne units carry it into the Netherlands during Operation Market Garden. Tank crews keep one close in case steel walls become death traps. Combat engineers use it to slice wire, strip insulation, pry open crates, and clear obstacles under fire. Aircrewmen pack it as a survival tool, something that might cut them free from wreckage or help them live long enough to be found. Everywhere the knife goes, it proves itself not as a specialized weapon, but as an answer to countless unpredictable problems. In 1943, Britain's Special Air Service faces an unexpected choice. The SAS is already equipped with one of the most famous fighting daggers ever made, a weapon designed explicitly for silent killing, admired for its symmetry and balance. Yet in the field, SAS operators begin swapping those elegant blades for the American knife whenever they can. The reason is simple and brutally practical. The American blade survives abuse. It does not snap when twisted. It does not fail when used for tasks beyond stabbing. Its leather grip stays secure when soaked with rain or sweat. Its plain steel guard offers real protection. Where the British dagger excels as a precision instrument, the American knife thrives as a workhorse. Special operations soldiers value tools that endure neglect, misuse, and chaos. Beauty matters less than survival. By late summer of 1944, production reaches its high water mark. More than 2.5 million knives have been manufactured, more than any other American combat blade of the war. They are everywhere, from foxholes to flight jackets. Then, just as abruptly as it began, production ends. Inside the War Department, a directive circulates. The knife will no longer be made. Its blade design will live on, incorporated into a new bayonet intended for the M1 carbine. From a logistical standpoint, the decision is logical. One item can now serve 2 roles, but for the men who carry the knife, nothing truly changes. The blade still cuts. It still opens crates, frees tangled parachutes, and ends fights at arm's length. Manufacturing may stop, but service does not. When war erupts again in Korea in 1950, American forces deploy in haste, many equipped with leftover gear from the previous conflict. Among that equipment are knives already 7 years old, Leather handles worn smooth, finishes scratched and dulled by time. They still function. Paratroopers from the 187th Airborne take them on combat jumps. Rangers carry them on raids. In frozen mountains and bitter cold, the knife performs as reliably as it once did among French hedgerows. By the mid-1960s, the blade is more than 2 decades old. Newer designs exist, sleeker and more modern. Yet some soldiers continue to ask for the old knife by name. In Vietnam, men tasked with crawling into enemy tunnel systems favor it for reasons that have nothing to do with nostalgia. Its narrow profile works in confined spaces. Its double-edged blade is effective no matter how it is held. Its uncomplicated construction means there is little to fail underground. Long after it was supposed to disappear, the knife remains in use into the early 1970s, spanning continents, climates, and generations of warfighters. What began as a low-cost substitute ends up serving for more than 30 years. From the beaches of Sicily to the jungles of Southeast Asia, a blade that cost only a few dollars becomes one of the longest-serving American fighting knives ever issued. Today, surviving examples are prized by collectors. Early versions command astonishing prices. Museums display them behind glass, not as symbols of elegance, but as proof of something more important: industrial efficiency, functional design, and the power of restraint. Its influence did not end with its own service life. Every American bayonet that followed carried its genetic imprint. The blade profile, the false edge, the straightforward guard, all trace their origins back to the design finalized in 1943. For decades, American soldiers carried weapons shaped by the same philosophy: strip away excess, keep what works. Yet the true legacy of the knife is not measured in auctions or exhibits. It lives in the moments it made possible. The soldier who cut himself free from a tree under fire, the ranger who moved unseen through hostile territory, the tank crewman who survived when steel walls failed, the tunnel rat who returned from the darkness alive. Every one of them trusted a blade that cost almost nothing to make. The knife it replaced had been heavier, more expensive, and more complicated. It looked fearsome, designed to intimidate as much as to fight. But it demanded strategic materials, complex labor, and careful handling. The newer blade asked for none of that. It was light enough to forget you were carrying it, strong enough to trust without question, simple enough to maintain anywhere. One was engineered to impress. The other was built to endure. Sometimes the most effective weapon is not the most advanced or ornate. Sometimes it is the one that works when plans collapse and everything else fails. The knife proved that simplicity can outfight sophistication, that reliability can outweigh innovation. 7 ounces of steel, a stack of leather, and a refusal to be complicated solved a problem that millions of dollars and elaborate designs could not. That is the story of the M3 trench knife, the blade few asked for and countless depended on. A quiet tool that shaped history not through glory, but through survival.